The lecture hall buzzed with restless energy, a cavernous room of arched ceilings and worn wooden benches, filled with students who had come to hear Elon Musk speak. He stood at the podium, lean and sharp-eyed, his presence a quiet storm against the academic backdrop. The topic was artificial intelligence, a subject he wielded like a blade, cutting through conventional thought with relentless precision. But the air shifted when Dr. Samuel Harrow, a tenured theology professor, rose from the front row, his graying beard and thick glasses framing a face taut with conviction. Harrow wasn't there to ask about neural networks or Mars colonies. He had a different fire to stoke. Musk had been mid-sentence, explaining the exponential growth of computational power, when Harrow interrupted, his voice steady but edged with something personal. He challenged Musk's worldview, not on technology, but on meaning, on the soul, on God. The room stilled, students leaning forward, sensing a collision brewing. Musk tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, but his eyes were cold, calculating. Harrow pressed on, his argument rooted in Scripture, in the idea that human existence couldn't be reduced to algorithms and physics. He spoke of a higher purpose, a divine hand guiding the chaos of life, his tone carrying the weight of decades spent in study and prayer. The students exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, others intrigued. Was this a trap? Could a man who built rockets and rewired industries be rattled by questions of faith? Musk let Harrow finish, his silence a coiled spring, and when he responded, his words were deliberate, laced with a dry amusement that didn't quite mask the steel beneath. He countered with the vastness of the universe, the improbability of a deity in a cosmos of trillions of stars, each burning without care for human concerns. Harrow's face reddened, not from embarrassment, but from a rising heat, a belief tested, and now provoked. What did it mean to stand so firmly in one's truth, only to face a mind that saw it as a relic? Was faith a fortress or a cage? The exchange grew sharper, Musk dismantling Harrow's assertions with data, with logic, while Harrow leaned harder into the emotional, the intangible. Students began to murmur, their phones slipping out to record, sensing this was no ordinary guest lecture. The air thickened with tension, a clash not just of ideas, but of something deeper, something raw. Musk's patience seemed to thin, his gestures more animated, while Harrow's voice rose, trembling with a mix of defiance and desperation. The moderator, a nervous graduate student, tried to steer things back to artificial intelligence, but the detour had taken hold. Why did Harrow care so much? What drove Musk to meet this challenge head-on instead of deflecting? The room was no longer a lecture hall. It was a crucible, and the two men stood at its center, unyielding. By the time the hour mark hit, the debate had veered far from its origin, and the emotional fault lines were exposed, jagged and deep. Harrow sat down, but his eyes never left Musk, who paced the stage, restless, as if sensing the real fight was just beginning. Musk prowled the stage, his footsteps echoing in the now silent lecture hall, a predator sizing up the moment. Harrow sat rigid in his seat, hands clasped tightly, his gaze locked on the man who had just dismissed centuries of theological scaffolding with a few curt sentences. The students, once restless, were now captive, their attention split between the billionaire's restless energy and the professor's simmering resolve. The air felt heavier, charged with the unspoken stakes of this clash, a battle not just of intellect, but of identity. Musk turned abruptly, facing Harrow directly, his voice cutting through the stillness with a controlled intensity. He questioned the rationality of clinging to ancient texts in an age of quantum mechanics, his argument weaving through probabilities, evolutionary biology, and the cold mechanics of a universe indifferent to human yearning. Each point landed, like a hammer, methodical, unrelenting, his tone never rising but growing more incisive, more piercing. Harrow's jaw tightened, his fingers digging into the armrests, as if anchoring himself against the onslaught. He stood again, unbidden, his movement abrupt, almost defiant, and the room held its breath. The professor countered, his voice quaking but forceful, leaning not on logic now, but on the visceral weight of human experience, the need for something beyond the measurable. He spoke of love, of grief, of moments that defied equations, his words raw, exposing a vulnerability that clashed with Musk's clinical dissection. The students shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, others frowning, caught in the crossfire of two men who seemed to see the world through irreconcilable lenses. Musk's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation breaking his composure, and he stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his presence looming. The exchange grew jagged, Harrow's passion colliding with Musk's precision, each interruption more pointed, each rebuttal more personal. The professor accused Musk of arrogance, of reducing humanity to a machine, his voice cracking as he gestured toward the students, imploring them to see the cost of such a worldview. Musk fired back, his tone laced with a rare heat, questioning the morality of a belief system that demanded obedience over inquiry, his words sharp enough to draw gasps from the crowd. The moderator tried again to intervene, stammering, but was drowned out by the rising tide of their voices. Sweat beaded on Harrow's forehead, his glasses slipping as he pressed forward, undeterred, his conviction a shield against Musk's relentless logic. Musk, for his part, seemed almost exhilarated, his gestures broader, his arguments faster, as if feeding off the resistance. The hall became a pressure cooker, the students no longer mere spectators but witnesses to a reckoning. A few stood, craning to see better, while others typed furiously on their phones, the moment spilling beyond the room's walls. By the end, Harrow's hands trembled, and Musk's smirk had vanished, replaced by a hard, unreadable expression. The air between them electric with unresolved fury. The lecture hall seemed to shrink under the weight of the standoff, the space between Musk and Harrow crackling with a tension that felt almost physical. Musk stood at the stage's edge, his frame taut, hands clenched briefly before loosening, as if reining himself in. Harrow remained on his feet, chest heaving, his face flushed with a mix of exhaustion and unyielding resolve. The students were no longer whispering or recording. They were frozen, eyes darting between the two men, sensing the moment, teetering on the edge of something explosive. Harrow took a step forward, his voice hoarse but steady, launching into a final desperate defense of his faith. He spoke of community, of the comfort found in ritual, of a moral compass forged by something greater than human whim, his words tumbling out in a rush, raw and unpolished. The professor's hand shook as he pointed at Musk, accusing him of stripping meaning from life, of leaving nothing but a sterile void. His tone bordered on pleading, a man fighting not just for his beliefs, but for the students watching, for their souls, as he saw it. The room felt the shift, a ripple of unease spreading through the crowd. Musk's response was immediate, his voice low, cutting, a blade slipping through the professor's fervor. He dismantled the argument piece by piece, questioning the validity of comfort if it rested on illusion, challenging the ethics of a morality imposed rather than reasoned. His words grew sharper, more personal, probing Harrow's reliance on faith as a crutch, a refusal to face reality unfiltered. The billionaire's calm cracked, his gestures abrupt, his eyes flashing with a rare, unguarded intensity. He paced, again, faster, as if the ideas themselves drove him, the logic spilling out in a torrent that left no room for retreat. Harrow staggered under the barrage, his rebuttals faltering, his voice breaking as he tried to reclaim ground. He clutched at the edge of a bench for support, his glasses fogging slightly, but he wouldn't sit, wouldn't yield. The students watched, some visibly shaken, others leaning in, drawn to the raw humanity of the professor's struggle against Musk's unassailable certainty. The confrontation reached a fever pitch, Musk's voice rising for the first time, not in anger but in a fierce, almost triumphant clarity, while Harrow's responses grew quieter, more strained, his energy draining but his spirit unbroken. The moderator, pale and sweating, finally stood, shouting for order, but the plea went unheard. A student in the back row stood too, yelling something lost in the chaos, and others followed, their voices a jumbled chorus of support and dissent. The hall erupted, not in applause, but in a messy, visceral release, the tension spilling over into noise and motion. Musk stopped pacing, his chest rising and falling, staring at Harrow, who met his gaze with a look of weary defiance. The clash had stripped them both bare, exposing the fault lines of their convictions, and the room reeled from the impact. The lecture hall trembled with the aftermath, a cacophony of raised voices and shifting bodies, students caught in the wake of the storm that had just broken. Musk stood still at last, his breathing steadying, his face a mask of hard-won calm, as he surveyed the chaos. Harrow slumped against the bench, his hands gripping its edge, his eyes fixed on the floor, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The moderator, flustered and outmatched, waved his arms futilely, his calls for silence swallowed by the uproar. But the real battle was over, its echoes lingering in the air like smoke. Musk stepped back to the podium, his movements deliberate, reclaiming the space with an authority that silenced the room without a word. When he spoke, his voice was even, measured, carrying a quiet power that cut through the lingering noise. He didn't attack Harrow again, didn't need to. Instead, he turned the focus outward, to the students, to the future they'd inherit. He painted a vision of humanity unbound by dogma, driven by curiosity, by the courage to question everything, his words building a momentum that felt less like a lecture and more like a call to arms. The students listened, rapt, some nodding, others wide-eyed, the energy shifting from conflict to something electric, alive. Harrow lifted his head, watching, his expression a tangle of defeat and stubborn pride. He didn't interrupt, didn't rise again, but his silence spoke volumes, a man who'd fought his fight and now faced its end. Musk's argument swelled, weaving through the potential of technology, the vastness of the cosmos, the beauty of a world explained by reason alone, each point a brick in a wall Harrow could no longer breach. The professor's shoulders sagged, not broken but bent, his faith intact but his challenge spent. The room felt it, the tide turning, the weight lifting from one man and settling triumphantly on the other. As Musk finished, the hall erupted again, this time in applause, a thunderous wave that crashed over the stage. Students stood, clapping, cheering, a few shouting questions or praise, their faces alight with a mix of awe and conviction. Musk acknowledged them with a nod, a faint smile breaking through, not smug but satisfied, the look of a man who'd faced the fire and walked through it unscathed. Harrow rose slowly, gathering his papers, his movements heavy, and slipped out a side door, unnoticed by most, his exit a quiet surrender to the moment's victor. The energy lingered as Musk stepped off the stage, surrounded by students eager for more, their voices a buzz of excitement, of possibility. The hall emptied gradually, but the impact stayed, a story already spreading beyond its walls, carried by those who'd witnessed it. Musk had won, not just the debate, but the room, the future, his vision standing tall over the rubble of Harrow's stand. The triumph was complete, undeniable, a spark ignited in the minds of those who'd watched, a spark that promised to burn long after the lights dimmed.